When I first met Nathan, it was at one of those poker nights that friends set up to forget about the grind of daily life. He was charismatic, effortlessly charming, and clearly at ease with his success. He owned a string of upscale restaurants and a couple of investment properties, making my modest consulting firm seem like a small-time operation. Still, he never flaunted his wealth in a way that felt crass. He was just Nathan. My wife, Clara, was drawn to his humor and knack for storytelling, as most people were. I didn't mind. I admired Nathan too, even though I sometimes felt like I was living in his shadow. At those poker nights, Clara would sit in the next room, laughing at whatever sitcom she liked, occasionally poking her head in to refill drinks or check on us. Nathan always made her laugh louder than anyone else could, but I brushed it off. After all, he was my friend, and Clara was my wife. Things seemed to change when Nathan invited Clara and me to a housewarming party at his newest property. It wasn't just a house. It was a mansion, perched on a hill with sweeping views of the city. I remember watching Clara's face light up as she walked through the grand entryway. It stung a little, knowing I couldn't give her something like this, but her admiration felt innocent then. At least, I thought it did. The party at Nathan's mansion was dazzling, the kind of event that made you forget who you were for a while. Expensive champagne flowed freely, and the food, of course, was catered by Nathan's own restaurants. Clara looked radiant that night, wearing a dress she had bought just for the occasion. She'd always been beautiful, but something about the way she moved through Nathan's house made her seem untouchable. Nathan, as always, was the center of attention, but I noticed how often his gaze found Clara in the crowd. A lingering glance here, a playful smile there. At one point, I caught them chatting in a corner, their heads close as if sharing a secret. I felt a flicker of unease, but brushed it off. Nathan was my friend. Clara was my wife. There was no reason for concern. Still, the evening stuck with me. On the drive home, Clara couldn't stop talking about Nathan's house. "Did you see the pool?" she asked, her voice bright. It was like something out of a movie. "And his wine cellar. He must have hundreds of bottles down there." I nodded, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Yeah, it's impressive." "More than impressive," she said, almost wistfully. "It's perfect." That word lingered in the air between us, souring the rest of the ride. Over the next few weeks, I began to notice little things. Clara was on her phone more often, smiling at texts she didn't share with me. When I asked who she was talking to, she'd brush it off with a vague answer. A coworker, a group chat, her sister. She also started going out more. Lunches that ran long. Errands that seemed to take hours. I didn't want to believe anything was wrong, but the cracks in our once solid marriage were becoming harder to ignore. Still, I chalked it up to stress or boredom. Life had been routine lately, and maybe she just needed a change. I should have looked deeper. A few weeks after Nathan's housewarming party, he called me with what he described as an amazing idea. "Mike," he said, his voice brimming with enthusiasm, "you and Clara have to come over for dinner. Just the three of us. It'll be low-key, no fancy party stuff, I promise." I hesitated. Nathan wasn't exactly the low-key type, but he sounded genuine. "Sure," I said. "Clara will love that." Nathan chuckled. "Great. Friday, 7 p.m. Bring your appetite." When I told Clara about the invitation, her face lit up. "Dinner at Nathan's? That sounds fun," she said, a little too eagerly. That Friday, Nathan greeted us at the door with his signature charm. His house seemed even more grand without a crowd, its luxurious silence almost intimidating. The meal was exquisite, every dish perfectly prepared and paired with wine from his collection. Nathan and Clara were in high spirits, trading jokes and reminiscing about the party. For most of the evening, I felt like an outsider, watching their chemistry as if I weren't part of the equation. Nathan would ask Clara about her work, her interests, and her dreams, his attention never wavering. I tried to interject a few times, but they'd already moved on to the next topic, their conversation flowing effortlessly. After dessert, Nathan offered us a tour of his home. Clara was especially excited, eager to see every detail. As we walked through the sprawling rooms, I caught her gazing at him, her expression soft. It was subtle but unmistakable, a look of admiration that made my stomach tighten. At one point, Nathan showed us his office. The shelves were lined with books, awards, and photographs that spoke of his success. Clara lingered by one of the windows, looking out at the city lights, while Nathan leaned casually against his desk. "You've built something incredible here," I said, trying to steer the conversation. Nathan smiled, but his eyes flicked briefly to Clara. "Thanks, Mike. It means a lot coming from you." The words felt hollow, but I let it slide. That night, as we drove home, Clara was unusually quiet. When I asked if everything was okay, she nodded, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Just tired," she murmured. But I could feel it. Something had shifted, and I was too afraid to admit what it might be. The days following that dinner at Nathan's felt off. Clara was still present, but it was as though her attention had drifted to some place I couldn't reach. Conversations became shorter, her laughter less frequent, and our routines, once comforting, felt strained and unfamiliar. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself that I was imagining things. Maybe work was weighing on her. Maybe she just needed space. I told myself it was normal, that every couple goes through lulls. But the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. One night, as we sat on the couch watching TV, I decided to bring it up. "You've been distant lately," I said, keeping my tone light. "Is everything okay?" Clara glanced at me, her expression unreadable. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. You've just seemed preoccupied," she sighed, setting her phone down on the coffee table. "It's nothing, Mike. Work's been stressful. And honestly, I think I'm just bored." "Bored?" "Not with you," she added quickly, as though she could see the sting of her words. "Just with everything. Work, the routine. I feel like I'm stuck in a loop." I nodded, trying to empathize. "We can shake things up. Go somewhere new, take a trip, whatever you need." She smiled faintly. That might be nice. But her words felt hollow, as if she were humoring me more than agreeing. The next few weeks passed in a similar haze. Clara spent more time out of the house, often coming home late from errands or catching up with friends. I started to notice changes in her habits, new clothes, a little more makeup, and a sudden interest in the gym. One evening, as she headed out to meet a friend for dinner, I caught myself wondering if that's where she was really going. The thought felt absurd, even paranoid, but it lingered. I tried to push it aside, convincing myself that she was just trying to break out of her rut. After all, Clara and I had been through so much together. Ours was a marriage built on trust. At least, I wanted to believe it was. Still, I couldn't shake the growing sense that I was competing for her attention with someone else. And in the quiet moments, when I allowed myself to really think about it, one name always surfaced: Nathan. It was subtle at first. Small things that only someone deeply attuned to their partner might notice. Clara's perfume lingered longer when she came home late. Her phone, once casually left on the kitchen counter or the nightstand, was now always with her. She'd glance at it, smirk at a message, and quickly tuck it away when I was near. I told myself these were innocent changes, the kind of adjustments people make as life evolves. But the unease gnawed at me, growing louder in my quietest moments. One afternoon, I came home earlier than expected from a meeting that had been canceled. As I walked through the door, the sound of Clara's laughter floated down the hallway. It was light, carefree, the kind of laugh I hadn't heard from her in months. "Who are you talking to?" I called out, making my way toward the living room. Clara froze, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. She quickly ended the call. "Oh, just Michelle," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "She's going through some stuff at work." I nodded, though something about her tone felt off. I didn't press her on it, but the incident stayed with me. The next day, while Clara was out running errands, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, staring at her laptop. It was open but asleep, the screen dark. I hesitated, guilt and curiosity battling for dominance. Eventually, I gave in and tapped the keyboard. The screen flickered to life, revealing a browser tab open to an email account I didn't recognize. It wasn't hers. It couldn't be. The messages were casual, almost innocuous, but one name jumped out at me: Nathan. I didn't open any of the emails. I couldn't. It felt wrong, invasive, even though my gut was screaming for answers. Instead, I closed the laptop and sat there, staring at the blank screen, my thoughts racing. Nathan. It had to be Nathan. That night, as Clara sat across from me at the dinner table, chatting about her day, I couldn't focus on her words. My mind was consumed by the pieces of the puzzle slowly falling into place. For the first time, I wondered if I was ready to face the truth, and if I wasn't, how much longer I could keep pretending. The days that followed were like living with a phantom. Everything seemed normal on the surface, but an invisible tension hung heavy in the air. Clara was cheerful, even affectionate, but it felt forced, like she was playing a part. I couldn't shake the thought of that unfamiliar email account. What if I had looked deeper? What would I have found? One evening, Clara told me she'd be heading out for dinner with friends. As she stood in front of the mirror, fixing her makeup, I studied her reflection. She looked radiant, more than she had in months, but her excitement seemed misplaced. "Which friends?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. "Just the usual girls," she replied, not meeting my gaze. She kissed me on the cheek before leaving, her scent lingering long after the door shut behind her. I sat there for a while, debating whether to follow her. It felt like an invasion of her privacy, a step too far. But the doubts in my mind were growing louder with each passing moment. Finally, I grabbed my coat and keys and left the house. I knew where her so-called friends usually met, but her car wasn't there. Instead, I found it parked outside a quiet bistro on the other side of town. Through the dimly lit windows, I saw her seated at a small table, laughing. And across from her, leaning in as if they shared a private joke, was Nathan. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. They weren't touching, at least not visibly, but the intimacy between them was undeniable. The way they leaned toward each other, the easy rhythm of their conversation. It wasn't the way friends talked. I backed away, my chest tight, and hurried back to my car. My mind raced with questions, each one more painful than the last. How long had this been going on? Was it innocent, or had it crossed the line I was so afraid to face? When Clara came home later that night, she acted as if nothing had happened. She kissed me goodnight, her smile warm and familiar, and climbed into bed beside me. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how much of our life together was still real and how much was already slipping away. I decided I needed proof, real, undeniable proof, because until I had it, I'd never be able to confront the truth. The moment I decided I needed proof, something inside me shifted. The nagging doubts that had haunted me for weeks gave way to a cold determination. I didn't want to live in the limbo of suspicion anymore. If there was something between Clara and Nathan, I had to know. I began by keeping a closer eye on Clara's routine. When she said she was going to the gym or meeting friends, I tracked the time she left and returned. I started noticing inconsistencies, longer gaps between her errands, excuses that didn't add up. Then, one day while she was in the shower, I saw her phone sitting unattended on the counter. My hands trembled as I picked it up, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew her passcode. It was my birthday. I hesitated, staring at the lock screen, the weight of what I was about to do pressing down on me. This was a line I'd never crossed before. But then I thought of Nathan's name in that email account, the way Clara had looked at him, and the resolve returned. When I unlocked the phone, I didn't find much at first. Her recent texts were mundane, messages from coworkers, friends, and family. But as I scrolled deeper, I noticed a thread under a generic contact name, work updates. The texts were coded, almost like they were trying to hide in plain sight. Mentions of meeting for the project or reviewing notes didn't sound like anything Clara's job would involve. My stomach churned as I read on, the language becoming more familiar, more personal. Finally, there was one message that hit me like a punch to the gut. "Same time this week? I can't stop thinking about you." My grip on the phone tightened. There was no name tied to the number, but I didn't need one. I already knew who it was. I snapped a few screenshots and put the phone back exactly where I'd found it. When Clara came out of the shower, she didn't seem to notice a thing. Later that evening, as we sat across from each other at the dinner table, I forced myself to act normal. Clara talked about her day, the same easy rhythm of conversation we'd always shared. But I was miles away, my mind racing with the implications of what I'd seen. This wasn't enough. I needed something irrefutable, something she couldn't deny. So I made a plan to uncover the truth once and for all. And if it was what I feared, I wasn't sure what would come next. With the screenshots of Clara's messages weighing heavily on my mind, I knew it was time to dig deeper. I needed evidence that would leave no room for doubt, no chance for Clara to spin an explanation. That weekend, I decided to stay home under the pretense of being sick. Clara didn't question it, offering a sympathetic smile before heading out to run errands. I watched from the window as she drove away, my chest tightening with a mix of dread and determination. Once I was sure she was gone, I went to her laptop. I'd seen her check emails on it before, and I hoped it might give me a lead. Her email account opened easily. She'd saved the password. The inbox was clean, just a series of work updates and receipts. Nothing incriminating. But when I checked the trash folder, my heart sank. Dozens of messages between Clara and Nathan were there, most of them vague but suggestive. Phrases like, "I can't wait to see you again," and "last night was amazing," jumped out at me. There were no explicit details, but the tone of intimacy was undeniable. Then I found the one that confirmed everything. "Thanks for making me feel special again. I needed that. You're my escape." I sat back in the chair, the air feeling heavy in my lungs. My mind raced with questions, but there was no denying what I was seeing. They weren't just friends. I forwarded the emails to myself and deleted any trace of my activity before closing the laptop. My hands were trembling as I returned it to its place on the kitchen counter. Clara returned a few hours later, cheerful as ever. She kissed me on the forehead and brought me soup, fussing over my supposed illness. Her kindness felt hollow now, a performance I couldn't unsee. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. I had proof, but instead of feeling relieved, I felt hollow. What was I supposed to do now? Should I confront her? Should I confront Nathan? As I turned the options over in my mind, a part of me still clung to the hope that there might be an explanation, that maybe this wasn't what it seemed. But deep down, I knew the truth. The storm was coming, and there was no way to avoid it. The days following my discovery were some of the hardest of my life. I carried the weight of what I knew like an anchor, pulling me down every time I looked at Clara. Her smile, her laughter, even her touch, they all felt like cruel illusions, a mask hiding the betrayal beneath. I needed more, not because I doubted what I had found, but because I knew the confrontation would be brutal, and I had to be prepared for whatever defense she might throw at me. One night, while Clara slept, I unlocked her phone again. This time, I went straight to her photo gallery. Most of the pictures were innocent, selfies, landscapes, photos from family gatherings. But tucked away in a hidden album, I found videos and photos that shattered any lingering doubts. One video, in particular, caught my attention. The thumbnail alone made my stomach churn. A shot of Nathan's living room, instantly recognizable from the dinner we'd had there weeks ago. With shaking hands, I pressed play. The video was short, less than 30 seconds, but it was enough. Clara was seated on Nathan's couch, her laugh unmistakable, as Nathan leaned in and kissed her. The camera angle suggested it was an accidental recording, likely taken while they were unaware. My chest tightened as I watched, a mix of rage and heartbreak coursing through me. I couldn't watch it again. Instead, I transferred the video to my phone, alongside the emails and messages I'd already collected. For the next few days, I carried on as if nothing was wrong. Clara seemed oblivious to the growing distance between us, or perhaps she was too preoccupied to notice. She still went about her routine, still laughed at my jokes, still said, "I love you," before bed. But I couldn't bring myself to respond. Each word from her felt like a dagger, twisting the wound deeper. The evidence sat in a hidden folder on my phone, burning a hole in my conscience. I knew I couldn't keep pretending much longer. But every time I thought about confronting Clara, I hesitated. How do you accuse someone you've loved for years of destroying the life you built together? One thing was clear. I wasn't just confronting her. I'd be confronting Nathan too. And I had to decide whether I was ready for the fallout that would follow. The question wasn't if I'd confront them. It was when. It happened on a quiet evening, a night that felt no different from any other. Clara was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone while I sat on the couch, pretending to watch TV. My mind was elsewhere, consumed by the weight of the evidence I had gathered. Her laughter broke the silence. "You won't believe this meme," she said, holding her phone up for me to see. I smiled faintly, feigning interest, but my eyes drifted to her phone. A notification popped up at the top of the screen. A message preview. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Same place." The name on the notification wasn't Nathan, but I knew better now. It was one of her aliases for him, a coded name meant to conceal their connection. My pulse quickened, and I knew I couldn't hold back any longer. "Let me see your phone," I said, my voice calm but firm. Clara froze, her smile faltering. "Why? Just let me see it." Her hesitation confirmed what I already knew. She clutched the phone tighter, her knuckles whitening. "Mike, what's going on? Why are you acting like this?" I stood, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay composed. "Because I know, Clara. I know about you and Nathan." The color drained from her face. I don't know what you're talking about." I pulled my own phone from my pocket, opening the folder that held the damning evidence. "Don't lie to me," I said, showing her the screenshots of their messages, the forwarded emails, and finally, the video from Nathan's living room. Her hands flew to her mouth as her eyes widened in shock. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator. I can explain," she stammered, tears welling in her eyes. "Explain?" My voice cracked, the anger I'd been holding back spilling out. "Explain how you've been sneaking around with my so-called friend? Explain why you've been lying to my face for months." Clara burst into tears, her sobs echoing through the room. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she choked out. "It was a mistake. I wasn't happy, and he made me feel alive again." Her words were like knives, each one cutting deeper than the last. I wanted to yell, to scream, to demand answers that might make sense of the betrayal. But instead, I felt a crushing sadness, the weight of years together crumbling in an instant. "You had a choice," I said, my voice trembling, "and you chose him." She tried to reach for me, her tear-streaked face pleading for forgiveness. But I stepped back, shaking my head. "I can't do this anymore, Clara. I can't." Without another word, I grabbed my coat and walked out the door, the night air cold against my face. Behind me, I could hear Clara calling my name, but I didn't turn back. I had finally reached my breaking point, and there was no turning back. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, the sound of Clara's voice still ringing in my ears. The pain was sharp, almost physical, but beneath it was an odd sense of relief. The truth was out now, undeniable and raw. Eventually, I parked at a quiet overlook outside of town. The city lights sprawled below me, blurred by the tears I hadn't realized were falling. I sat there, trying to process the tidal wave of emotions crashing over me. Anger, betrayal, grief. After a while, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the evidence again. The texts, the emails, the video. They felt like artifacts from a life I no longer recognized. I wanted to delete them, to rid myself of the pain they brought, but I knew I couldn't. Not yet. I called Nathan. When he answered, his voice was casual, as if he hadn't just blown apart my life. "Hey, Mike. What's up?" "I know," I said flatly. There was a pause, then a nervous laugh. "You know what? Don't play dumb, Nathan. I know about you and Clara." The line went silent for a moment, then he sighed. "Mike, save it." I cut him off. "You've been lying to me for months, sneaking around behind my back. After everything, you had the nerve to sit across from me, act like my friend, and smile." "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," he said, his voice low. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." I laughed bitterly. "Funny, that's exactly what Clara said." "Look, I'm sorry," Nathan said. "I never wanted to hurt you." "But you did," I snapped. "And now you're going to have to live with it. Because as far as I'm concerned, you're dead to me." I hung up before he could respond, my hands trembling. For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of clarity. I couldn't control what they had done, but I could control how I moved forward. When I finally returned home, the house was quiet. Clara was sitting on the couch, her face pale and tear-streaked. "Mike," she began, her voice hoarse. Don't, I said, holding up a hand. We're done, Clara. Pack your things and go. You can stay with him for all I care. Her expression crumbled, and she reached for me again, but I stepped back. I mean it, Clara. You've already made your choice. Now you'll have to live with it. I walked upstairs and shut the bedroom door, leaving her sobbing in the living room. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I felt an emptiness I couldn't describe. But beneath it was something else, a glimmer of resolve. This was the beginning of the end, but it was also the start of something new. The following morning, the house was eerily quiet. I wasn't sure if Clara was still there, or if she had left in the middle of the night. Part of me hoped she was gone, that I wouldn't have to face her again, at least not right away. But as I came downstairs, I saw her sitting at the dining table, a mug of untouched coffee in front of her. She looked up as I entered, her eyes red and swollen from crying. Mike, she began softly, please, can we talk? There's nothing left to say, I replied, keeping my voice steady. I don't want to leave things like this, she said, her voice trembling. We've been through so much together. Please, let's at least try to fix this. Her words felt hollow, like the echoes of someone grasping for something they'd already lost. I shook my head. You made your choice, Clara. You chose him. And now I have to choose myself. Her face crumpled, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I love you, Mike. I do. I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't. The betrayal was too deep, the trust too broken. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this, I said, my voice firm but not unkind. You wouldn't have lied to me for months, or turned to Nathan instead of coming to me when things got hard. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Instead, she buried her face in her hands, her sobs muffled. I leaned against the counter, watching her, feeling a strange mix of pity and detachment. The Clara sitting before me was a stranger, someone I no longer recognized. You need to pack your things, I said quietly. You can stay with Nathan, or wherever else you want, but you can't stay here. She looked up at me, her expression desperate. Please, Mike, don't do this. I didn't do this, Clara, I said, my voice hardening. You did. Without waiting for her response, I turned and walked back upstairs, leaving her to process the reality of what was happening. By the time I came down later that evening, her suitcase was by the door, and she was standing in the foyer, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. I'll go, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But, I'm sorry. For everything. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. She lingered for a moment, as if waiting for me to say something, to stop her. But I didn't. Finally, she picked up her suitcase and walked out the door. The sound of it closing behind her echoed through the empty house, leaving me alone with my thoughts. For the first time in years, the silence wasn't comforting. It was deafening. The house felt cavernous in Clara's absence, its once familiar corners now alien and cold. I wandered through the rooms aimlessly that first night, unsure of what to do with myself. Her scent lingered faintly in the air, a cruel reminder of the life we'd shared and the one I had to leave behind. I thought about Nathan, about Clara, about the moments that had led to this fracture. How long had I ignored the signs? How much of my trust had been misplaced? The questions swirled in my mind, relentless and unanswerable. In the days that followed, I busied myself with work and errands, anything to fill the hours. But every quiet moment brought the pain rushing back. Friends began to notice my distraction, offering support and unsolicited advice, though I hadn't shared the full story with anyone. I wasn't ready for the questions, the pity, the inevitable gossip. It was only when I sat down to talk to a lawyer that the situation began to feel real. The conversation was straightforward, dividing assets, updating accounts, and beginning the paperwork for divorce. Saying the word out loud, divorce, sent a fresh wave of grief crashing over me. Later that evening, I found myself scrolling through my phone, staring at the evidence I'd collected. I knew I should delete it, that holding on to it would only prolong my pain. But something inside me hesitated. The next day, I called Nathan again. What do you want, Mike? His tone was defensive, weary. Relax, I said, though my voice carried an edge. I don't care what you and Clara do anymore. She's your problem now? He was silent for a moment, then asked cautiously, "Then why are you calling?" "Because I hope you understand what you've done. Not just to me, but to her. You've taken everything we built and turned it into a joke." Nathan let out a long sigh. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." "Stop saying that," I snapped. "You both made choices, Nathan. Now you get to live with them." Before he could respond, I ended the call. As the weeks went by, I began packing up Clara's remaining belongings. Each item felt like a relic of a life I no longer belonged to. A forgotten sweater, an old photo of us at the beach, her favorite mug. I boxed everything carefully and left it by the door, ready for her to collect whenever she was ready. The process was painful but necessary. With every item removed, the house felt a little lighter, a little less like it belonged to someone else. It was my house now, my life, and I had to figure out how to live it again. The weeks stretched into months, and slowly, the raw ache of betrayal began to dull. It didn't disappear. It was always there, lingering in the background, but I was learning to live with it. The divorce process was straightforward, thanks to our lack of children and the clarity of our assets. Clara didn't contest anything. When she signed the papers, she left me a brief note. "I'm sorry for all the pain I've caused. I hope one day you can forgive me. Clara." I read it once, then tucked it into the drawer of my desk, unsure if I'd ever look at it again. Forgiveness felt far away, an abstract concept I wasn't ready to confront. Nathan, on the other hand, had vanished from my life entirely. Mutual friends seemed to distance themselves from him as well, as if his betrayal had tainted the friendships he once held. From what little I heard, Clara had moved in with him, but their relationship was already strained. A part of me wanted to revel in their misfortune, but I knew it wouldn't bring me peace. I threw myself into work, taking on new projects and longer hours. The distraction was welcome, and the sense of accomplishment helped rebuild my confidence. I even started going out again, grabbing drinks with old friends, attending small gatherings. But the house still felt like a weight, a reminder of everything I'd lost. Every room carried memories of Clara, her laugh in the kitchen, the way she hummed while folding laundry, the quiet nights we spent curled up on the couch. One evening, I decided to repaint the living room. It was a small change, but as the fresh coat of color dried on the walls, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The act of transforming the space was symbolic, a step toward reclaiming my life. Soon, I found myself tackling other rooms, rearranging furniture, and filling the walls with new art. With every change, the house began to feel less like a monument to what was and more like a canvas for what could be. I wasn't ready to start dating again. Not yet, but I was learning how to be comfortable with myself, to sit with the quiet and embrace it as an ally rather than an enemy. Healing was slow, but it was happening. And for the first time in months, I began to believe that I might be okay. It was a sunny Saturday morning when I saw her again. I was at a cafe downtown, sipping coffee and reading a book, when Clara walked in. She didn't see me at first, her focus on the barista as she placed her order. She looked different. Her hair was shorter, and there was a tiredness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. But when her gaze swept the room and landed on me, her expression froze. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she hesitated, gave me a small, tentative wave, and approached my table. "Hi, Mike," she said softly. "Clara," I replied, nodding. "Do you mind if I sit?" I gestured to the chair across from me, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe I needed closure. "How have you been?" she asked, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup like a lifeline. "I'm doing okay," I said honestly. "Keeping busy." She smiled faintly. "I'm glad to hear that." There was a pause, heavy with unspoken words. Finally, she spoke. "I've been meaning to reach out, to apologize properly. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to know how sorry I am." I studied her for a moment, searching for the sincerity in her words. It was there, etched in the lines of her face and the tremble in her voice. "I appreciate that," I said. "But Clara, forgiveness doesn't mean going back. It doesn't mean forgetting what happened." She nodded, tears pooling in her eyes. I understand. I hope you're happy. You deserve that. I wasn't sure how to respond. Instead, I offered her a small smile. I'm working on it. We sat in silence for a moment longer before she stood. Take care of yourself, Mike, she said. You too. As she walked away, I felt a strange sense of relief. The weight I'd been carrying, the anger, the sadness, felt a little lighter. I finished my coffee, left the cafe, and walked home under the bright blue sky. The pain of what Clara and Nathan had done would always be a part of my story, but it no longer defined me. I was moving forward, one step at a time, into a future that was finally my own.